Your project, once you have the UVs laid out, once you have your base clean material on there, what the next stages are going to be. For this project, we're going to be doing 2 renders. The best way to show off any model is by doing a 360. Okay, so what we want to do is for our product, we want to have it just either the product spin around or a camera spin around the object. So in this case, I have my product here. I created a little stand for it. The stands are nice to put there because it makes it feel like it's a little bit more realistic. If you just have an object floating, it doesn't feel as realistic. Even going so far as to add, I'll just duplicate this. Let's go down, make it bigger. Something like that to again make it feel like there's something else in the scene. Like there is no like black space that this object is floating in. Definitely helps kind of pull it off. Now I made sure that these 2 objects were lined up perfectly centered. So when I went to my top view and I clicked on this, and let me turn off. Let me just throw this on a layer and hide it. Let me throw this on a layer and hide it. There you go. So when this one is pivoted, I just made sure that it was snapped. So I'm holding down X and snapping it right to there. That way it's perfectly centered right in this middle line. Obviously making sure that my center pivot is on and then doing that definitely helps too. And then the other items were also there too. I did the same thing for this one, same thing for that one. And then I also made sure that this was like sitting on the ground. It's not floating above it, because if I go like that, like that, it looks like it's sitting on there until I come around and then I can see it's floating. So you want to make sure that you take the time to get this stuff lined up good so it's not just floating around. Okay. Then I went and I set up my camera. Okay. So I want to do, in this case, I'm going to do a 360 camera. That's a common thing that you'll see if someone has a model where they spin the camera around. Another thing that they'll do is grab everything in the scene and just rotate the items in the scene around 360 degrees. Okay. You get different effects with each one. So with the camera, what I'm going to do is I grab my camera, I set up my focal length. So if I go with something like 10, you can see how it makes it feel a little bit more powerful. This is probably too much power. 20 was a good number for me. Okay, the default is 35. Okay, so look, it makes it feel kind of flat. If I go with 80, it feels incredibly flat. All right, so I'm going to go with 20 and set up my camera for how I want this thing to look. Okay, click the blue circle and kind of line up how I'm framing my shot. Once I have this, I'm going to pick one of the objects in my scene. Under the visualize, there's a turntable thing. So this is how easy this is. We specify how many frames. We're going to do 120. We specify the direction. I like counterclockwise. And then we say turntable. Now it doesn't look like anything happened, but right down here, I'm in turntable camera 2. So what it does is it makes a camera, groups it to itself, and then spins it around that object over 120 frames. So now when I hit play, you can see how we spin all the way around the object. Okay. Now I do want to correct something. One of the issues that you're always going to have inside of Maya when you do this kind of thing is you're using the defaults. So I'm going to go to my graph editor, and I have the cylinder still selected. I have to grab the group. So if I go to my outliner and I grab my group, here it is. So what it's doing that I don't like is it's slowing down at the beginning, speeding up in the middle, and then slowing down at the end. Okay, so it's easing in and easing out, which is great for a character or some other type of animation we're doing. But when we have a camera do that, it leaves inconsistencies. Let's say I wanted to make a platform where my item would just spin around forever, basically. Okay, I can't do that with this because it'll slow down and speed up over the entire thing, and it looks kind of funky. So if I make this linear, so I just click that button. Now when I hit play, you'll see that it's going to continuously spin. Okay, so it's just continuously spinning. There is a small hiccup right at the end. That's not a big deal because it's just an extra frame. But it's spinning at a continuous speed. So now this animation I could reuse for lots of different things. Okay, So now we have to set up the lighting on here. So I switched to a different camera. That's what I just did. And I'm going to create some lights. So here's my lighting setup for this. Because of the because of our camera spinning around this entire object, I have to light it essentially from every direction. Okay? If I go in here with just a single light, create a area light, make it big. And then do our same little trick. Intensity is up to 500. This is quadratic. This is on. This is 1. And let me take my settings down because it's like really high right now. What we're going to see is that from the front, it may look good enough, right? Like if I look at just this front face here, you know, you might say, well, that's good enough. But as I get around to the other side, there's no lighting. Okay, the light's just on one side, it hits it, and then we get blackness on the other side. Okay, so you have to have lights on basically all the way around the object. So what I do is I make sure that this intensity is dull enough that I can add more lights. Like I wouldn't want to crank this up to 2000 and make it look good from the front because I know I'm going to duplicate my light all the way around, and it has to have enough lighting to do that. And if this is too much and I duplicate it around, it's going to blow out the entire thing. So I'm going to take my light and I'm just going to group it. So I hit Control G. Then I'm going to duplicate it, Control D, and then I'm going to rotate it. And I'll rotate it 72 degrees is what I did before. And then I hit Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. Now that gives me 5 copies of my light. So that from any angle I should be able to see a pretty decent representation of my object. Okay. Also what we're going to get is we're not going to get any weird shadows. Like if we just had one light, we're going to have a hard shadow this way. If we had 2 lights, we're basically going to have one shadow this way, one shadow that way, which looks kind of weird. So this looks like some nice overall lighting. I still need to add something to the ground just so it's not, it's basically just a flat Mila right now. I need to add something and adjust the reflection on here so it's not so much. Okay. I also want to just add in an extra light. Okay, so I added in another light inside here. And I'm going to shrink this one down. And this is just going to hit at just a small angle. And what it's going to be used for is just kind of add a little bit of accent. If we light this thing from the same light source, light intensity all the way around, it flattens it out. Adding in this one extra light will just kind of boost it, so the front will be a little bit more brighter, a little bit more exciting to look at. Okay, so if I render this again, it may turn out too bright because now I have an extra light kind of shown from the front, or not at all. Look at that. That's pretty good. All right, I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to add a little bit more intensity to this, like 800. And this will just help kick up that light, just add a little bit more fanciness to it. There you go, that's looking good. Now we have this nice sharp line here that we didn't have before, and that. Cool. Okay. All right, so that's as far as the lighting needs to go, okay? Then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my turntable. Okay, you wanna look at this from several different views. You never want to just assume that you set up the lights, you looked at it from one angle, it's good. You want to just see it from at least 3 views around your box. All right, so that looks pretty good there too. Okay. So then I'm going to set up my rendering. So I'm going to go to my render settings, and starting at the top, we're just going to call this product clean. Oops, put my name in here, Sarcona_product clean. Enter. Now everything we render in here is going to be OpenEXR files. Okay, for now at least. OpenEXR is a format developed by ILM. You know how a regular image like a JPEG allows us to hold red, green, blue colors. A TIFF lets us hold layers. A PSD lets us hold layers. We can hold alpha channels. We can hold paths. We can hold all this information. So an EXR allows us to hold a lot more layers, a lot more information inside of one file. Okay, so we want to use those. Because we're rendering an animation, we'll set this to name.number.extension. My end frame is 120. Oops. 20. There we go. My camera is my turntable camera 2. That's the one I just set up. My width is 960. My height is 540. My quality, I'll crank this up to 2. And I believe the default for that was 1. I set it to 2.5. And then under my scene, I want to set up a couple passes, okay? So in the intro class, we really didn't get into doing render passes, but what these allow us to do is add a little bit more depth to our stuff, okay? So if I jump back to this image, it's kind of hard to see, but these two objects are definitely touching, okay? They're making contact. Same thing here. So what we're gonna do is render out a pass called ambient occlusion. And what it should do is create darkness in these areas, okay, and help us kind of hone in some of that crispness. So I'm going to scroll down to where it says ambient occlusion and click that on. Where it says max distance, I'll type in, let's say, 1. I also want to include depth, so I'll click on depth. And that should be it. Close that. All right, so now when I render, what I'm going to do is I hit the render button. This is going to show me the quality setting I was currently at. It's going to show me what everything is looking like, okay? I need to preview what the ambient occlusion looks like. I need to preview what the depth looks like. We can't do that right inside of Maya too easily, so I like to use Nuke. And eventually we'll be getting more into Nuke, but for right now, you'll see how I can just go into Nuke and then preview what I need to preview. It's not down. Not today. And obviously this is going to take some time to render this out. You can see how long just this one frame is taking. So as it's rendering out, you'll see here is my EXR in the in my images temp folder, okay? Whenever you hit the render button, it sends it to your images temp folder as long as your project is set correctly. All right, so now we're just waiting for this to finish. Now, one of the things I'll need to look at is my texture is an 8K image. If I drop that down to a 4K image, it'll have less texture size. So I may be able to get away with, depending on how much detail I have, I may be able to get away with a smaller texture, and that'll help it render faster. For one frame, it's not a huge deal, but when you think of we're rendering 120 frames, that is a big deal for that, okay? Ambient occlusion should be a black and white image. We should have black everywhere these objects are touching, and we should have white in these blank areas, okay? For the depth is basically how far from the camera our object is, okay? And it's literally reading every single bit of it. So it's going to be basically in Nuke, it's going to be a red image, but it's essentially a white image. But if we look at the data, we'll be able to see that it's actually reading how far from our camera each one of these pixels is. Dropped it into my node graph. Alt right mouse button allows us to pan around. Alt middle mouse button allows us to zoom in and out. Okay, those are the only two we need. Now in order for this to connect, to see what this is, I have to drag this little viewer to that. Okay, so now I can see what that thing is doing. Now if we look at this, we'll see this red, green, blue, white, purple, and then green. So this means that it has red, green, and blue, which is just color information. The white means there's an alpha. The alpha is transparency. So back here where there's no object, I can see through it. If I wanted to put a new backdrop back there, I can put a backdrop back there because there's transparency with it. The purple means there's depth, and the green means there's other. So that's the ambient occlusion. So now to see those, I can come up here. And if I just go to alpha, I can see the alpha channel, okay? And the alpha channel shows me where it's opaque and where it's transparent. Black is transparent, red is opaque. If I go here to my depth, this is also red, but here's the difference. Let me scoot this down. Let me switch back to alpha. All right, look where my mouse is right here. Okay, it's just on this red area. If we come down here to where this is like the info about what it's reading for that color value, it's set to 1. Okay, so what that means is, if you remember from Photoshop class, you have so many values of red, green, and blue. This is all the way up to red. Okay, it's 100% red right there. So if I go to my depth, look what happens here. It's at 14. And as I bring this down, what it's doing is it's actually showing me not red, it's showing me the depth from the camera of how far that pixel is. Okay, so what does that mean to us? We can use this information to create what's called depth of field. We can blur out the background and keep our product in focus. Okay, now you can do that inside of Maya too, but it takes a lot longer. And then if you want to edit it, you can't edit it very easily. Okay, so now we can read all this information in here, and we'll be able to play with it in a second. And then ambient occlusion, you'll see my ambient occlusion did not render. So something must have gone wrong with that. I'll have to investigate why that did not render. All right, let me just check this real quick.
Will that show up as a color thing too? A little color square?
Ambient occlusion?
Yeah.
It should be just white and black. That's what it should be showing up as.
I mean, when you're showing the little note, you tell us what all the colors do, the red, green, blue.
Oh, that? Yeah.
What was that?
That one was the red one. So it is there. It is reading that there is the ambient occlusion channel here, but it's not showing anything out there, which is weird. Usually I get at least white. And I did hit escape, so maybe I just didn't have time to calculate the ambient occlusion. That's possible too. So I'll look at that and see why that's doing that. All right, so now let's take a look and see what the depth does. Okay, so we'll get more into using this, but I just want to show why we're rendering these two things out. So I'm going to use what's called a shuffle node. A shuffle is basically like extract. Like I have this information inside here. I want to pull out the information and use it. Okay, so if I want to pull out, let's say, the depth, I can pull out the depth. So now with this thing hooked up to the viewer, this is just the depth. Okay, so we don't need that for this specific one, but we will later. I do need a Z to focus. So all the stuff over here, this is all your menu items. You can also hit the tab key and type in stuff. So if you know you need Z to focus, you can just type in Z to focus, and there it is. Okay. Now with this connected in the chain, you can see how it's going to flow from here to here and then into the viewer. Okay, whatever the viewer is connected to, that's what we're seeing. So I'm going to come over here and say I'm going to set up the depth. There it is. And then all I have to do is use this little dot. Wherever I put the dot, that's what's in focus. Okay, so now here's the before and after. Here's what it looks like with the blur. You can see how the background's kind of blurry. Here's what it looks like without it. Okay, so you can see how it adds just a bit more realism to it, just having that little fuzziness. I can also crank up my blurriness. I'm going to go really crazy just so you can see it better. It's thinking, it's thinking. And you'll even see up here it's blurry. Down here it's blurry, but right in the center of this, it's in focus. And all I have to do is just move that dot and change what's in focus. Now this effect is a little bit more apparent when we have an actual object that has depth to it, right? So if our object is a piece of paper, there's not much depth that we'll be able to blur. With these, there's not a whole lot of blurriness or a whole lot of depth on the object. When we get to doing characters, we get to doing scenery, it'll become a lot more apparent because we have more depth in our scene. That looks horrible like that. Okay? So for now, you're going to render out the depth, and we'll play with it inside here once we get that done. So no and no. Okay, so I'll figure out why the ambient occlusion thing didn't work. It should have rendered out, probably because I hit escape, that it stopped rendering. But there's only one option, which is right here. So it's either my depth, my distance could be too small or too big. It's based on your scene. So if I switch to my scene and I turn look at my grid, 1 unit should have been fine, okay, because it's a pretty small area. If my scene was way out here and my grid units are this to this, you know, just a small area, this is 1 grid unit, then 1 would have been way too big, and I may have had to shrunk it to like 0.001, okay? But I've modeled everything pretty close to my regular grid size, so I think I just hit escape too quick and then it stopped it. So we'll see that too. So we'll render this, we'll render that. That should be good. All right. So then once we're ready to, we'll go to our rendering. We'll batch render it. I always uncheck this, set this to 16, say batch render and close. And then away it goes. Now, as this is rendering, I right click, I go to Task Manager, I make sure my Maya batch is right here, and I watch the CPU number. If the CPU number doesn't get up above 30, depends on the day, if it doesn't get above 30, then that means that something's gone wrong, and I need to cancel my batch render and then restart it, okay? I may need to go back to my batch render options and set this to 14. This button here, these numbers, are how many processors are on your computer. We have 12. 12 is a good number. I think we have 12. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12. Yep. Okay. Yep. So we have 12. So as long as you put as many processors as we have, you're good. If you put less, it'll only use less. Okay? So I don't know why you want to use less, but you don't. So yeah, less is more. Not here. So we would use 12 processors. If it said 14 processors and we only have 12, it would still try to use as many as possible. So it's going to 98%. So if I'm done working on this, I want to right click, I want to set priority below normal, say yes if it pops up. And what that's going to do is whenever someone is working on the computer, the Maya batch won't take over what they're doing. If this is set to normal, like that, or above normal, it never should be above normal or higher. If it's set to normal, if I'm on the computer and this is rendering, it's going to fight for priority, right, for dominance. So we always set that below normal. And then we'll also grab a render sign like this, and we'll put it on our computer. That way people know we're rendering, do not turn the computer off. Because if they do, then it stops the rendering. Yes, ma'am.
I actually made my own on Tuesday. Like I told you, I was re-rendering my bouncing ball for animation. Put my own little render sign on there saying, please do not turn off the computer. My homework is rendering.
That works. All right, so while that's rendering, we can work on other stuff, okay? Now you always want to check it too. So like while this is rendering, I would go to my images folder. Bless you. There it is. And I would wait. I would wait for number 1 to be done, okay? When number 1 is done here, I will open it up, I'll check it out, I'll make sure it's rendering the right camera, I'll make sure it's rendering the channels and layers that I need. You don't want to have to go back and re-render this thing out, okay? So once it's done, it'll say down here, percentage of rendering done, 100%, or it'll go to the next frame and we'll see that. But that's only frame 1. So this might take some time. This might take all night. Luckily, there's no class in here until 5 o'clock tomorrow, okay? There's a class right after, but they don't matter. Yeah, well, most of you are in the same spot next hour, so it works out. So no, it's at 90. So you just render it and then let it go overnight, and then there it is, okay? Now, while this is rendering, it's also a good time to then start thinking about what the other version is going to be. So one version of this is our clean version. That's what I'm showing here is the clean one. The other one is going to be the dirty version, okay? Yeah, it doesn't sound right.
Dirty. Really?
The grungy one, let's put it that way. The other thing you can do too, sometimes if you're using Nuke or you're using some programs, even though we set the priority below normal, it still doesn't like certain things. So if you go to set affinity, which is basically you're telling it which processors to use, you could just turn them off. I can say I only want you to use these 2 or 4. There you go. Not all of them. The most software will only use the first 4. There you go. All right, so I'm going to go to a new file. I'm going to go to my new path. 20 work product skein. Can. I think it's that one. I go to my color, UVs, my root path. Oops, I meant that. While this is thinking, there it goes. Good. Okay, so I just chose my product scene. Not sure what it did there. I think it's just a glitch. I'm just gonna hit OK. So what I'm doing is we already have my clean label. I already know what it looks like if I have a RustyCan and I have a label on the front of it and a label on the back of it. I have that already. So now I want to envision what it would look like if this thing was just like left out in the rain or used for years and years and years. Like, what would it actually look like? So I went to textures.com and there it is. And I grabbed a couple Rust images here. Okay, and I want to use those. Of course, you're going to have a critical error.
Seems about right.
I'm going to drop these into my source images folder. So I have that. Okay, so now I'm going to make a third texture that has all this other information on it about what it looks like when it's all rusty. So there's my OCan. This is going to be that.
What was that program that you showed us a clip of when it was putting in like the rain texture, like the different
Substance.
Substance.
Yep. And then my texture is 8,000 pixels, so I'm going to go 8,000 pixels here. And hopefully it'll play nice. If not, I'll go with the lower texture just to kind of show it. But the idea is that we're going to be painting in areas that make sense. So for my Maya one, here we go. I'm in perspective. So in here, I'm going to paint, obviously I'm going to paint rust on the can, but I'm going to do it in a way that makes sense. I'm not just going to put random rust here and ignore like this area right there. If I looked at a image of a RustyCan, most of the rust is going to happen in these areas first because those are the top, or they're going to happen in the bottom. Very rarely would you ever see like the middle of the can rusty, but not the top or the bottom, just because of how they're set up. Okay. Spam.
Speaking of rust, it makes me think of this funny Pinterest pin I found of
All right. It didn't like that piece of geometry for some reason, so I just re-exported the geometry and now it brought it in. Okay. You get Photoshop. So all I'm doing here is painting what the rust on the can would look like. We have to paint two things. One, let's say the label got eaten away. What areas of the label got eaten away? And then two, like what's underneath it? And then where is all this rust? So I'm going to drop these images into my image manager. Okay. So now I have these rust inside the image manager. I'm going to hit 5 and 6. These are my front and back sides of this. And then I can just drag my rust into here. Okay. Using these hotkeys straight across, I can hold Control Shift, shrink this down, hold Shift, drag it up. Let me zoom in a bit. Go. And then I can just paint this rust on here.
Did you get the rust from that site?
Yeah, from CG or from textures. All right, so there's our rust, and then I'll spin around. Oops. There we go. Now I'm going to just paint this. And then I'll hit 5. There we go. So now you can see how that rust is getting around that edge. Okay. Now I probably need to zoom in a bit more just because it's still looking kind of grainy. It does matter what size you're at, so if I hit 5 and I'm really far back, it's painting it super small. So I need to zoom in like that, and then move this up, make this bigger. Okay. I'm also getting, remember the streaking issue? I want to fix that too so I don't get that streaking. So let me hit 5 again. Let me zoom in. There we go. I'm going to go to my projection. I'm going to turn on my edge mask. And then I'm going to adjust the edge mask. Is preview edge mask on? Mask preview. There we go. There we go. Okay. So now I'm just adjusting this so there's a little bit of red right around the edges here. And that's just going to help so I don't accidentally paint those areas. There we go. So I hit Alt, and that's going to paint it in there. If I don't like how something's turning out, I can always go back to my color, go back to my UVs, go back to my regular brush, and I could fill this with whatever color. So I click on this, I go to black, I hope that doesn't crash. It's typically not this temperamental. Typically it's not. Really. So this is my current label. So you see how I have this atomic motor oil, I have this atomic label, I have this metal inside here. Okay. There's my rust. Let me grab my PSD. It should be in my images. There it is. Okay. So this is the label that I made for the can. This is my actual PSD. So the idea is once you're done with your painting inside of Mari, you've exported out your rusty area. Okay. So let's just pretend that I have it in here that I can use. For whatever reason, it just wants to keep crashing today, so we'll just move on. So 2520, work, here, source images, rust, rust. All right, so I'm just going to drag these rust images inside here. I don't know what's going on there. Okay.
So are you opening what you exported out of Mari?
It didn't let me even work in Mari because it just kept crashing.
Is that the plan?
But that's the plan, yeah. We would just export it out. So this metal right here is the one I exported from Mari originally.
You would export out to what?
Just export out to a TIFF.
A TIFF.
Yep. And then that gives you this when you export it out of Mari. And then you just drop in your label on top of it. And then you should have your rust too that you could then go in and move these around and line up. So if I'm trying to eat away,
So it would all be separate?
yeah, they'll all be separate things that we add into one PSD for our new color. Okay.
So do we go Photoshop to Mari, back to Photoshop?
You go to Mari and then you go to Photoshop. So pretend that this is my new can label that I got from Mari. It's got some rust on it, like that. What I'm doing is just incorporating these images into that final image. I'm basically rebuilding my color map. Okay, so what does the color look like? Well, it's got these grimy, dirty splotches all over it. And then it also has these rust pieces on top of it too. Okay, so I have to figure out how do I want to incorporate that into this label. So what I can do is I can use some of my selection tools to do that. So if I just go to, let's say, my magic wand, I turn contiguous, oops, sample all layers. There you go. And I click. What this should do is go through and grab all the stuff that is that color. I picked tolerance of way too low here. There we go. Okay, so it grabs all of this stuff. Now what I can do is just kind of slide it over. So now it's like on top of the label. And then if I go to my metal here and I invert it, or no, yeah, invert it, and then I make a layer mask, you'll see that now this metal is like basically like it's only appearing in certain areas. Okay, that's what's happening here. So this layer mask is only showing the metal in certain areas. So this way we're actually like mixing in the original texture plus this one.
Actually, it looks very believable too. Like that invert would be
And then I can just fill in the rest of this with white. There we go. And then fill in the rest of this area with white. So I'm just filling all the rest of this layer mask in with white just so that it's all nice and neat back to where it was. Okay, so now our label looks like it's pretty tore up. Then maybe I want to go through and add some extra, oops, come on, some extra grime to this. Wrong one, there. There we go. All right, now we're back to where we were. So then I could go through, there was my rust at. And this would already come in lined up. The rust would already be lined up because we painted it inside of Mari. Okay. So then we could just say, okay, there's rust. Let me jump to Maya real quick and see how close this is to the top. It's right there. Okay. So I take this rust and just put it right here. I'll just duplicate it over. There we go. So now we have this rust line coming in from the top. I can also turn my UVs on in here so I can see what the UVs are doing. Just move this right up to the top of it so I can see everything. And then I can see, oh, this should probably come up just a bit. There we go, just like that. Okay. So now let's pretend that this is my new texture. So I'm going to save it as source images, RustyCan. I'll save it as a targa. Save. Now you may see me jump around targas, TIFFs, ifs. It really doesn't matter. They'll take anything. Sometimes it'll give you an error if you save it as a TIFF or something. For the most part, it should be good. So here's my new RustyCan. Okay. Now in order for this to look, again, more believable, I have to make sure that the bump on here is that same kind of bump. But I can't use the same image. Like if I go to my utilities and I say bump 2D, where are you at? Right there. And I go to my bump value and I go to my file, I can't use the same RustyCan image. Because what's going to happen is you'll see that the picture here is actually bumped out. Okay? And if it's a label, it's a piece of paper, that piece of paper would not be bumped out. Okay? Because it's just reading the black and white values from this. So then I would go through here and I would turn off my labels. That's the rust. Where's the other one? Oh, right there. There we go. Okay. And then because these are coming out white, I would need to fix that. So maybe I'll just go into here. Yeah. And you can see how I can hold shift and click that so I can disable this mask or enable it. I think what I'm going to do is just duplicate it. And then I'm just going to do a levels on the mask. Just to soften it some. I don't want to get rid of it totally, but I want it to be softer. Maybe the other way. Nope, that was the way. Okay, so RustyCan bump. Make sure it goes into my source images. And now watch when I put this on, the label will still be bumpy, but it's going to be bumpy based on the rusty metal. There it goes. So now it's kind of rusty all over. I could probably, or should probably soften up some of this, but part of that's going to come from this bump depth, just kind of knocking it down some. Negative 0.1, there we go. And then let's see what else. Maybe it's not as glossy because it's rusty now, so we'll knock that down some. It's a bit rougher, so we'll pull that up some. And these are my settings are still high up, so I probably should have lowered those before I hit the render button. So now we'll have a really cool comparison of here is a clean can, here is a dirty can, right? And I could probably put some more rust like along the side here. If we got into Mari where it didn't crash every 2 seconds, I would go with my texture brush now, just paint in rust. I would go and grab a texture, and I started doing this. That's basically just like a wall of rust. Not that one. Like that.
Didn't you do the rust in Photoshop?
Because in Photoshop, I don't have the ability to nicely lay it out. In Photoshop, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Because of where the UVs are.
Because you can paint it right on that 3D object.
Right on the 3D object, right.
But what did it export? Did it just export a 2D image?
From Mari?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what it would export. So when you go into Mari and you painted your clean texture, you get like a nice clean metal. You drop it into Photoshop, put your label on top of it. Then you go into Mari and you paint your rust, export the rust, and you drop that on top of that image inside of Photoshop. So all you're really doing is just creating layers of different elements inside of Mari. So imagine you had a couch. The couch is green, and it's got this fluff on it, and then it's got, let's say, a pattern of plaid, and then it's got dust on it. So we're painting all these different layers. Then in Photoshop, we're just putting them all together. So then we can create these kinds of items. Being able to do this is why I like to start off with this project. Being able to take a project, a product, and make it nice and clean is one thing, but then to make it dirty and believable is another thing. Once we can do this, then we can do stuff like our environment, where we're going to be having some items that are clean, some items that are dirty. This is how we tell stories, is with our textures. Especially when we have just a still image, we have to have other items in that still image to help us tell that story. Okay? So I'm just going to hit escape because it's still thinking. All right, so it's not too bad. I could obviously fix up some of the stuff and adjust it, but it definitely does look like this is a rusty can. The other thing I could probably do too, just inside Photoshop, let me turn this off, this on, turn all this stuff back on, is instead of having these, wait, where'd that pink come from? There you are. Okay. Instead of having these still be the nice orangey color, I should probably go into this and maybe fade them a little bit. Oops, inner shadow, color overlay. There we go. So that maybe. There you go. So something like that, and I'll just copy this color overlay onto here. What? Is that copy? Okay, so now it's a little bit grungier, a little bit dirtier. I could again drop another image on top of that, something else that I found inside of CG Textures, like this one. And I use the magic wand as one way to select it. You could select the stuff any way you want, as long as it gets selected, as long as it looks random enough. Oops, Photoshop. Photoshop, and then that, and then this. drag this to the top. There we go. So it's another little just adjustment to this, you know. So it's not as pretty as it was.
Now, if you wanted to take it a step further, you wanted to say dent the can or like remove the cap or like remove part of the rim, could you do that as well?
You could. If I wanted to dent the can, always make a copy first. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, you would just select some vertexes and just.
Yeah, and just squish it around. Now you have to be careful with this because if I go too far, I'm going to distort my UVs. If I go like that,
Well, yeah.
you'll see that, okay?
Okay.
So yeah, definitely if you want to dent it up a little bit and ding it around, just like I said, just be careful with it. And then, look at that weird it's doing. Turntable camera. There's my beautiful can. Oops, I should have saved this out first. But you should have fun with this. This should be like, you know, you get to make a mess. RustyCan. Yes. And then we'll reload this again. There you go.
Wow. That's a dirty can.
But we can keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and really create, you know, something that has a lot more story to it than just the clean can. Clean cans are nice for if you wanted to go into commercial work and you wanted to do products. Kentucky Fried Chicken wants you to animate their box popping into the screen. T-Mobile wants you to show their phones. Lots of different uses for that. If you wanted to go into something like gaming where you're doing environments, you're going to be doing more dirty environments than you were clean typically in a video game. Look at that. It's horrible. Horribly awesome.
No, they're back in the Commonwealth.
Yep. And then we could even take this a step further.
The same hue of gray and
Well, what we could do is we could simulate a little bit of particles on here and then have like a little oil spill because oil cans broke open, now it's spilling out. We don't need to do that, but why not? FX.
Extra credit.
let's throw it through a sheet.
So I made an emitter. The emitter is going to fall down like this. There we go. These are going to be colliding objects. End cloth, passive collider. I'm just going to set a key here, go up a little bit, set a key there. There you go. And then we'll just turn this off. Cool. And collisions. Thickness is low here. Click that one. Thickness is low there. There we go. What? You're still too big. There we go. Now you're hitting the ground. Cool. All right. So then I can take these guys. Well, it's kind of boring too, coming right out of the center. So there's my oil marks here, and then I just have to go to modify, convert, and particles to polygons. Beautiful. And then I have to go to my particle output mesh and then just play with this. Play with this.
Are you trying to get it to?
Trying to get to show.
Okay, that's what I was like. Are you
There
just
should be something there.
Seeing it? How are you doing that?
Just punching around numbers.
No, these are all things that should make that show up. There it goes. So my max triangle resolution needed to be turned up in order to see this. These three, the threshold, the mesh triangle size, and the max triangle resolution, are all three that should let us see these. So we always have to play with these three numbers in combination to get them to show up, and then once they show up, then we can tweak from there. You can see when it stops flashing, that means it's doing something. Well, it's doing something. Let me rewind it and hit play again. Nope. Show, everything's on. Display. Yep, they're there. There we go. Holy cow, 12,000? There we go. So now we're starting to get something. So let me turn that off again. And 50. That's a big size there. And this being up or down super low, the threshold is like how picky are you on which particles get made into geometry. 0 means I'm not picky at all. Like make them all a particle or make them all geometry. The mesh triangle size is how big each one of these triangles is going to be. I made this probably too small. And then the max triangle resolution is how many triangles are you allowed to have in this entire thing. So 12,000 is quite a big number. Yes, there we go. All right, so let's take this down to 0.1. There we go. 0.05. That's better. And let's take this to 30, 20, 10. All right. I'm just going to hit play and let this just play out. Give me some more frames here. There we go. I'm just going to wait until this is at like a good spot like this. And then I'm going to go to solvers. Not there. Solvers, initial state, set for selected. Oops. I have to grab the particles. Oh. Particles. Solvers, initial state, set for selected. There we go. So now when I rewind this, we get nothing happening. I can delete the emitter. And then I can just make this, because now it's just a polygon. I'll give that a Mila. I'll color it black. I'll make it plasticky. Turn that up, turn this down. And then the same thing I did here where I made these little particles there, I could have actually put them onto the container itself. There's a bunch of attributes like stickiness where I could have thrown particles at it and it would have just stuck to it. But now we have a little oil spill right here. That's kind of cute. I could have stained the entire thing and made the entire thing seem really dirty. It just would have taken more time to render. I definitely would have wanted some rust up here on the cap, a lot of rust on the top of this thing, and then a bit of rust along the edge on the bottom. Thinking about where this would be, most likely these things are on garage floors or some floor where they're interacting with a lot of moisture, and that's where the rust is going to be, or there's something dripping on it, and that's where the rust is coming from. You can always use your reference. As to where rust happens, see, it's usually like around the seams, areas that are going to capture water more. Okay, not a lot of rust underneath this because the water would trickle down around here. This is just all over rust. I like that one. That's cool. Okay, so that's where we want to paint all that stuff is inside Mari, then we export the texture out, bring it into Photoshop, and then we can have that. So there's my oil spill right there. Okay. So we probably should be able to finish these up by next week. Okay, being able to finish the texturing, render, maybe not render these out by next week, but get them ready to render by the end of next week, so that you're rendering out basically 2 of these while you're working on the next project. Okay, so we'll actually put the due date for this. You can write it down on October 5th. Will be our due date. I'll make sure I jot it down so I don't forget. You should have 2 videos. One video is a clean turntable of your product. Another one is a dirty rendering of your product. That same week, we're starting something new. So don't plan on working on this all the way up until then. It should be that you're just doing the movies, just rendering it out and making them into movies at that point. Okay? We'll be starting the next assignment in that time. That way we have some overlap between all of our assignments. That way we have allowing some render time in there.